All right, welcome back to ABA exam review in the continuation of our RBT practice exam series where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Gabe loses a bet and has to jump into his friend's pool in below freezing temperatures. As soon as Gabe jumps in, the freezing cold hits him and he runs to a hot shower. Gabe never jumps in freezing water again. The freezing cold is a blank. So we're looking at the freezing cold. So we want to identify where is the freezing cold happening in the scenario. Always be thinking in terms of antecedents and consequences. We know Gabe lost a bet. He has to jump into his friend's pool, which is freezing. When he jumps in, the freezing cold hits him and he runs to a hot shower. What's important is Gabe never jumps in freezing water again. Why? Well, Gabe's behavior was punished. When a behavior decreases, somebody or the consequence was punishment. So the consequence for jumping in that water is freezing cold. And that freezing cold led Gabe to never jumping in freezing water again. Gabe's behavior was punished. Now, if we look at our answer choices, it wants to know, was it unconditioned or conditioned? Well, we can eliminate A and B because Gabe's behavior was not reinforced. The freezing cold is not a reinforcer. Gabe's behavior decreased. So we have to ask ourselves, was it unconditioned or conditioned? And when you think about unconditioned versus conditioned, you have to think about learning history. Does it take learning and pairing to know that freezing cold typically acts as a punisher? Well, no. A newborn baby is very averse to freezing cold. Things like pain, extremely hot heats, extremely cold temperatures, those don't need to be learned. Those are just innately punishing. When we talk about conditioned punishers, we're typically talking about things like reprimands and being told no. But this freezing cold doesn't need learning history. No matter what age or learning history, Gabe jumping in freezing cold water, that's going to be punishing to him more than likely. So the freezing cold water is an unconditioned, or also known as a primary punisher. You put your destination into Google Maps before you leave the house. When you hit go, Google Maps informs you of a faster route, so you hit OK and take that route instead. Google Maps informing you relative to you taking the different route is a what? So we're looking at Google Maps relative to what? Relative to you taking the different route. Remember, antecedents, consequences. So we need to identify these different stimuli in the context of the scenario. So what is happening? Well, you put your destination in Google Maps. When you hit go, you're ready to leave, Google Maps says there's a faster route. Before you hit go, and before Google Maps informed you of that faster route, was that faster route available to you on Google Maps? It was not. Only when Google Maps informed you of that faster route in your Google Maps app could you pick that route. And so when you were informed of the faster route, you hit OK, and the consequence was you took that route instead. So the SD was Google Maps informs you of the faster route. The response is you hit OK, and the consequence is you take that route instead. So what makes Google Maps an SD? Well, Google Maps informing you, or Google Maps informing you an SD. Well, Google Maps informing you is signaling to you that that route is now available. It's signaling a consequence for taking this route, for hitting OK, is now available. It's signaling to you that if you engage in a response, reinforcement for that route is available. So Google Maps informing you is a discriminative stimulus, or an SD. It's not a prompt, right? Because you hit go, and then Google Maps is the consequence. Google Maps informing you is the consequence of you hitting go. And then in turn, Google Maps informing you is the SD for you hitting OK. There's no prompt in between inform and you hitting OK. Remember, that prompt comes right between the SD and the response. And it's not a punisher or a reinforcer because we're looking at it relative to you taking this different route. And it's the antecedent to the different route. So it's not a consequence. So you taking the different route after Google Maps informing you to taking the different route is going to be an SD. It evokes the behavior and it signals to you that a consequence is available, and that consequence is the new route. A street performer puts a ball under a cup in a field of 3 and then rotates the cups very quickly several times. The street performer asks you to pick a cup, and you notice the street performer glancing at the one on the right, so you pick that cup and are correct, even though the performer wanted you to get it wrong. The street performer glancing is what? All right, kind of an interesting question here. It's kind of a longer question. We're looking at the street performer's behavior, and particularly the glancing. So, what do we know about the glancing? Well, the street performer put this ball under the cup. He moved it several times, and then he said, pick a cup. When he said pick a cup, you saw him glance at the one on the right. Now, the street performer doesn't want you to get it correct. So, that glance is a prompt, but he doesn't want to be prompting you. So, think about in terms of teaching a learner in a field of 3. If you're teaching them shapes and you say point to the triangle, you don't want to give them the answer necessarily. But if you glance at the triangle and they see that, that's still considered a prompt. So when you give a prompt on accident or a prompt you didn't intend to give, what do we call that? A model prompt. A model prompt is when you act out a response. The street performer didn't pick the cup for you or show you how to pick the cup. The model prompt's out. B, positional prompt. We're not talking about the stimuli here. We're talking about the glancing. We're not talking about the cup, so be careful. We're talking about the glancing. So we're not talking about how the cups are positioned. So positional prompt is out. What happened was the street performer gave you an inadvertent prompt, meaning he didn't mean to prompt you. And this is something you want to be very careful of, especially with older learners and learners who might be quicker to pick up on some of your subtle cues. You want to be very careful about inadvertently prompting your learners because those prompts become those SDs, and we don't want that. We want the SD to be the SD. So what the street performer did was inadvertently prompt you. And of course, a verbal prompt is that spoken prompt, right? He didn't verbally prompt you. He inadvertently prompted you. He didn't mean to, but he did regardless, and it led to you picking the right cup. The street performer glancing is an inadvertent prompt. You'd at the best Mexican restaurant you've ever been to at the Aria in Las Vegas. Anytime your friends come in town, you have to take them to this restaurant, even though it is very expensive. What is affecting your behavior of continuing to go to the restaurant? All right, we have another consequence question, and we're looking at what behavior? We're looking at continuing to go to the restaurant. If you've been watching my videos or you've been studying by now, when you hear something like you keep doing something or you continue to do something, immediately you should be thinking reinforcement. When we say your behavior of continuing to do something, you should already be thinking reinforcement. So what is leading us to keep going to this restaurant? It's the best restaurant in town. Anytime your friends come in town, you take them to the restaurant, even though it's very expensive. So even though it's expensive, it doesn't stop you from taking them there. Well, when you go to the restaurant, you get good food, you have a good time, you bring your friends there, you get all these added stimuli as a result of going to the restaurant. So when stimuli are added, what do we call that? Well, we call that positive reinforcement. And so when you're eating at this great Mexican restaurant, you're getting all this positive reinforcement. It's not negative reinforcement, right? Because you're eating there, you're taking your friends there, you're getting all these added stimuli as the consequence. And it's not punishment, because from the beginning, when it says continuing to go, that means our behavior increased or at least maintained. So immediately, we must start thinking reinforcement. So you can easily eliminate punishment. What is affecting your behavior is positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement keeps you going back to the restaurant. You provide services during lunchtime at your client's house. The client eats lunch with his brother and mom. The mom tells you you are free to eat lunch with them as long as you bring your own lunch. What should you do? All right. A couple things here. One, we have to remember our role as the RBT, implementation. We're there to provide services. Two, dual relationships. We can't cross boundaries from professional to personal. Three, we have to do what's best for the client. In this case, you're providing services during lunchtime. Nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of things that can be done at lunchtime with your client. However, the mom says you can eat lunch with them if you bring your own lunch. Now, this is where it becomes gray, because If you eat lunch with them as part of a program, that's one thing. And that's still a little questionable because it's very easy to be cross that line into a personal relationship. And you're bringing your own lunch. So you're in a tough spot here. What do you think you should do as the RBT? A, eat lunch with the family to not be rude. Well, no, there's steps you need to take first. You can't just voluntarily and on your own eat lunch with them with no further instruction or no further planning, because then we're not providing services. You're just eating lunch with the family, which is not something you should be doing. B, as long as it is your own food, you can eat lunch with the family. Of course, it should be your own food, but still, there's things you need to do to ensure that eating lunch with the family is still providing value if you're going to do that to your client. C, decline to eat lunch and clock out until lunch is over. Well, not necessarily. Then you're just wasting your client's time and your time. This is still your client's time. So if the mom wants lunchtime during service, you still need to do something about that. So what you want to do is D, consult with your supervisor on treatment during this lunch period. And you'll notice these ethical questions over and over again. It always reverts back to consulting with your supervisor. And it might seem like the obvious answer. That's because it is. The task list and the ethical code encourages technicians to communicate quickly, effectively, and promptly with the supervisor on matters such as this. It takes it out of your hands because this is not your call to make. Maybe your supervisor wants you to provide treatment during lunch and they think it's a benefit for you to eat with the client. Maybe they just want you to support the client while they eat. It's not your call. So what you need to do instead of making a decision is consult with your supervisor. And then it's out of your hands, their decision, and then you can just do whatever they write into the treatment plan. Remember, when in doubt, always, always, always consult with the supervisor or the behavior analyst responsible for the case. An operational definition in ABA should contain all of the following characteristics, except what? What do we mean by operational definition? An operational definition allows us to consistently observe and measure the behaviors of interest. Instead of saying aggression, let's operationally define that. Aggression looks like a closed fist that is swung at another person, which makes contact with the skin hard enough to leave a mark. Now, that might seem very specific. That's because it should be. You want your operational definitions specific as possible so that anybody observing knows exactly what you're tracking. So if you're going to operationally define something, what should that contain? What characteristics? Should they be objective? Absolutely. You want to be as objective as possible. Not about your opinion or subjective take. What happened? That's all we care about. So when you look at be opinionated, the operational definition should not be opinionated. And so this question is asking except. So B is very likely our answer. Should the definition be measurable? 100%. That's what we're doing all day. Measuring, measuring, measuring. Should it be observable? 100%. If you go on to become a BCBA or continue your education, you'll learn about things like private events, which are behaviors that happen, but we can't see them, which is fine. They're just not great to track because you can't observe them. If you're going to define something, make sure it's observable. That way we can measure it, and you want to be objective. What you don't want to be is opinionated in your definitions. All right, thank you for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Please subscribe. Let us know when you pass so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. We'll see you soon.